Hello, I'm Rosalind Esche of dearreader.blog. Welcome to our crime scene podcast, which focuses on crime fiction writers. Today I'm in conversation with Elly Griffiths, author of the much-loved Ruth Galloway series set in Norfolk. I met up with Elly in Brighton, and we began by talking about her two different authorial identities and how they affect her style.
I suppose I do feel like that a little bit. So I obviously was first published as Domenica de Rosa,
Yes.
which is my real name, and I
Yes.
wrote kind of romance, women's fiction, I guess, under that name. And then when I wrote a crime novel, my agent said, you need a crime name, partly because Domenica de Rosa...
It's too lovely, is it, for crime?
It's kind of lovely. It's romantic, I guess.
Romantic.
It sounds like a romantic fiction name, but more than that, it just sounds made up. Which is ironical, really, because it's my real name. Yeah. And I remember when we used to work and I'd pick up the phone and I'd say Domenica de Rosa. I think people just thought I was singing. They didn't register that it was the name. Yeah, da-da-da-da-da-da. They didn't even take that in as a name. So I think the thinking was, first of all, you know, it's a new genre and it gave you a new debut in a way. Yes. So that was the other thinking. But I think... Elly Griffiths is a crimier name. So it was my grandmother's name. She was Ellen Griffiths. And I didn't really know her very much. She died when I was 5. But all the thing I'd always heard about her was that she was a very clever woman, very literate, loved books. But she had to leave school at 13 and go into service. Yeah. So I thought she'd really like her name on a book. And I wanted to be Ellen. And then when the books came out, somehow I became Elly. And I remember saying to my editor, why Elly? And she said, well, I think we must have talked about it. But she said, it just looked a bit tidier.
Do you feel your style is different under those two names? I mean, I'm reading Summer School at the moment, which I love.
Oh, do you know that's my favourite of my books, I think.
Is it?
Yeah, I think it is.
I really love
of all of them.
But it's got all your humour and warmth in it, you know, and it's just a delightful read.
Oh, thank you. I suppose also it has... I write all the pieces about creative writing students, and I write a little bit of each of their books, and that was so much fun to do. So yes, sorry, you were saying you were reading Summer School. Yes,
no, I'm just really enjoying it, and I thought how lovely that it's all about writers, and it's very witty about what writers and their personalities, and I wondered if you'd been to things like that yourself.
Do you know, when I wrote that book, I hadn't really. I remember I got an advertisement to go on a creative writing course, and it was... I couldn't afford it at all, but it was in Tuscany, and, you know, I'm half Italian, so obviously I love Italy, and I thought that sounds so great. And they had the programme, and it was like, morning, stretch, and then that went on for an hour, and then write, and then go and look around a vineyard, and I thought, this is so lovely, I'd love to do that. So I couldn't afford it, so the next best thing to do was to write about it. But I'd never been on a creative writing course, I'd never taught creative writing, because now I do teach creative writing at Cambridge, at Madingley Hall, and West Dean and Sussex, and...
Do you think your students now, if they read that, might think, oh my God,
I think they might well do. And also, Stranger Diaries starts with creative writing students. I hope they don't think that. I've never met anyone as bad as Jeremy, the tutor, in summer school.
Or Cat.
Or Cat, no, I've met a few cats, I think, probably. But generally, people who come on creative writing courses, of course, I've still never been on one like that, so I don't know who would go on that sort of course. But the people who do the sort of MA at Cambridge or at West Dean are incredibly nice. Normal, interesting people. Yes. So, no, they were not like the people in summer school.
So what made you choose crime? I mean, did it just happen? Did you just think up a plot and realise you'd written crime? Or did you think one day, I'm going to be a crime writer?
Well, I don't know. I think in retrospect, I had always been interested in crime. Where is our mint then?
I think it's floating around in there. It is. The leaves are in there.
Oh,
yes. Smell lovely.
This interview is going to be... punctuated by me saying, where's the mint? And
various
other very Brighton type. Is that the most Brighton sentence you could have? Where's the mint in my mint tea?
Well, Cambridge too.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yes, really. Probably more Cambridge than Brighton.
Cambridge.
It looks absolutely lovely. So, crime writing, why crime writing? And also, you did ask me whether I thought I wrote differently, which was an interesting question. I don't think I do at all. I think my style is still my style. And equally, when I write the Ruth books and the historical fiction series, the Brighton Mysteries, and, you know, gosh, we're in the grand here, aren't we? Couldn't be more Brighton Mysteries-y. I think my writing's the same, but people often might say, I wouldn't have known it was the same person. It's so different.
How interesting. Now, that is interesting, because I do feel, personally, that the style in the Brighton Mysteries is different.
Oh, interesting.
In the Harbinger Core one, the postscript murders, which I love.
Oh, good.
Because I love that sort of ragtag bunch of people that Edwin and Benedict and Natalka who go off sleuthing.
Yes,
and,
yes. Oh,
I loved
good.
all that, and it had all that humour going on in it. And the Bright Mysteries have a very different atmosphere for me.
I think there
Because
is.
they're set in the past, and
I think it is a bit that, but I do think I deliberately did set aside. It's funny because they, in a way, are kind of seen as a bit sort of golden agey, and it says on the
Absolutely.
cover recalls Agatha Christie, because Agatha Christie was quite dark, and I think they are quite dark.
They are.
And I think there is a dark atmosphere to them. So I think
agree.
you're absolutely right about that. Particularly the new one, the Midnight Hour, which has just come out.
I've just finished that one.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of dark. I went for a kind of dark feeling, as well as hopefully there are funny bits, and
Yes.
I hope that. But yeah, so I think you're probably, having said I thought the style was the same, I think possibly those are a bit
Those
darker.
are a little bit darker and a little bit more sober, and
Yes.
slightly different atmosphere to them, which is great because they're set in the past and it's kind of a little bit distant. And
Yes, and I suppose I wanted to show that the 60s weren't all swinging, and there was a
Absolutely.
darkness there. And William Shaw, who writes brilliantly about the 60s in his Breen and Tozer books, he says for most people the 60s didn't start till 1970, and that's
Absolutely.
kind of true in a
It
way,
is.
isn't it? And
it is. It's only London that was at the
yes,
heart of it.
exactly. And even writing about police officers, women police officers couldn't drive police cars till the 70s.
Yes, I didn't know that.
No, I actually got that from William Shaw's books, but it is true. They couldn't.
That's really
so
interesting.
you think of sort of emancipation and Midnight Hour is partly about sort of women's liberation, and one of the characters has been reading The Feminine Mystique by
Yes.
Betty Friedan, and that's kind of central to the plot, but it's still, there's a bit of humour in the books about the way the women are still always asked to make the tea and
Yes.
things like that, even so.
But it's quite subtle too. I like it because Emma, I'm not sure what I feel about Emma, to be honest, and I quite like the fact that at one point someone says something about Bob that's a bit disparaging, and she says something disparaging, and then you say she felt bad inside, she shouldn't have done that, it was disloyal, and later she sticks up for him a bit because Bob isn't an idiot.
No.
And so sometimes I'm wondering if you're sort of playing with misdirection in terms of her internal monologues and Meg's, that they're kind of being judgmental and critical themselves, and then have to pull back a bit because actually Edgar's a lovely person and a very decent man, and Bob's a decent man. Why are they? I don't know whether I've sort of.
Oh no,
misread it,
it's lovely to hear you say that. It's lovely to hear people pick up on those things. Yeah, because definitely meant because Emma is married to the love of her life and has a very
Yes.
happy marriage, and Edgar is a really nice
He is a
man,
really
and
nice
he's
man.
a modern man, and they were those sort of men in the 50s and
Absolutely.
60s,
Absolutely they were.
But even so, she finds her life restricting and frustrating,
Yes.
and she wants to be working. And I really do sympathise
Yes.
with that. And
Yes.
I want to show that there's sometimes, not such nice things she thinks. So I think we all think
think
that
that's brilliant.
a little bit. And I
So
think
she's not too much of, because there's a lot of, the great Emma Holmes.
Yes,
Everyone
yes.
sort of, bow down. And yet she's not always,
no, and
quite nice.
she wants to support, Meg as a young
Yes.
police officer,
Yeah.
but also she feels a bit jealous of her because she's a single woman and she's out there solving crime. So
Yeah. And she wants her to be intimidated by her, it says at one point. I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah, so
she realises
good.
She actually wants her to be intimidated.
Yes, well, sometimes I think it is all very complicated, isn't it?
It's complex.
And when I had my twins, which they're 23 now, 23 years ago, I was working at HarperCollins. Yeah, I was a editorial director actually for children's fiction, and I left because I couldn't sort of do the job
Yes.
and have twins. And I worked
Yes.
freelance for a long time, and then I started publishing books. But I felt that I still had the job, but I'd lost my career.
Yeah.
And I really did feel upset about that.
Yeah.
And you know how your eye falls on something? If my eye fell on the word Colin in a paper, I would feel a pang because it reminded me of HarperCollins.
Oh.
And even now I can't see HarperCollins written down without thinking,
Really?
so I do, it is almost, it's overdoing it, but you feel terribly sad to lose your job.
Yes.
Even though you love your kids.
love your children.
And,
and
I
you love
adored
them.
being a mum, and I
Yes.
enjoyed being with them in those early days. I wouldn't swap that.
Yes, exactly.
Absolutely.
Yes.
In fact, it was quite funny because I was then editing freelance a phonic series called Letterland. And so my kids appear in all these Letterland books. And they were very, very good at sort of their phonic sounds, because they were always hearing like Annie Apple says at in words, and these slightly eccentric, I would say, series that I was working on at the time. So yeah, it's very well. There are a few Domenica Maxted, which is my married name. There are a few books written by Domenica Maxted in the series. Paul, Peter Poppy's Perfect Pizza is one of my little known books, but it is there in the series.
Maybe you should write books specifically for twins as well, because now my brother has twin granddaughters just been born, and I was looking for books for twins to read them.
Oh, don't get me started on that, because
is it a problem?
It is a problem, and it is a problem in crime fiction as well. And I do say to my students, try not to have twins in your books, and that was one of Ronald Knox's, his 10 commandments of crime fiction. That is number 10. Twins and doubles generally should not be introduced unless we have been prepared for them beforehand. But it drives me mad that no one's ever just a twin in a book. It's always a plot point.
You're absolutely right.
It's always, and in quite a lot of fiction, they're incestuous as well. Look at Secret History, I love. But the twins have to be incestuous. And it is quite funny that they're called Giles and Camilla. I've always thought that's quite funny.
I have read it for years ago.
I think it's possibly was before Charles. Well, probably not really before Charles and Camilla, before we knew about Charles and Camilla. And my kids found Jacqueline Wilson's double act very, very troubling as twins, because the way that book took for granted. I don't think Jacqueline Wilson's a twin. I don't think she has twins.
No.
And I'm a big fan of hers otherwise. But she took for granted that being a twin was problematic, and that the only thing to do for a successful life was to get away from your twin. And a lot of twin fiction has that. They found it very funny, actually, and they still talk about it.
Good.
But it is a troubling, no one ever shows a positive side, whereas Gone Girl, Nick in Gone Girl, if you remember, he is a twin, and he's just a twin. And he gets on really well with his twin sister. She's very supportive to him. Surprise, they're not incestuous. Surprise, it's not part of the plot. So actually, kudos to Gillian Flynn for that, for creating a... So, yes, I won't go on any more.
It's interesting. I'm glad I brought it up. And actually, there's Peter James has broken that rule.
Yes, he has.
That wonderful book. I love that book in the Grace series with that character Bishop in it. And there are... Well, it's not twins, is it? It's triplets in the end. And it's a very complex history of where they were born and who had them. And it's so clever.
I think he does it quite respectfully, as I remember. I don't think it upset me particularly because of that. But it does always upset me when, and still you might read a synopsis saying, so Alice has always been in the shade of her... wonderful twin, and then blah, blah, blah. It's always seen as a good twin, the bad twin, absolutely, and it's not that at all. And it can be a beautiful relationship and very supportive.
Your twins are obviously
they're very close, but they lead different lives, they're at different universities, but they're close when they see each other. I don't think they would say it's been a problem to them. And actually, what a nice thing it is. They do say that they were lucky because they never had to, in the early days, make any of those sort of big transitions on their own, like starting school or, going to swimming lessons or, going to secondary school. They always had somebody there, although they were in different forms at school.
There was someone on
there was somebody there, going on the school bus, and I think they do appreciate that there was that there. They're very different. My daughter studies science. My son's a musician, so very, very different. So yes.
But also, if it's also the Ronald Knox thing about breaking the rules of crime fiction, you mustn't have twins to use as a device. Peter James does it brilliantly.
Yes, he does. And the good thing about Ronald Knox's rules, which I've just been looking at with my students last weekend at West Dean, is it's quite fun to try and break all of them.
Yeah, of course.
But some are very good. And rule number 2 is no supernatural element. And I've often played around with that a little bit in my books and had a bit of supernatural. And Peter James does that too, really, really well. But I think the solution must never be the supernatural solution. There has to be a real solution as well.
Right,
but
that's interesting.
I've even had secret passages, and I think that's rule number 3. So I think so. Yeah.
I like a good secret passage.
Yes, so do I, especially in my children's books and the justice books. That school has many secret passages. Of course it does.
Well, you talk about the supernatural. That was another of my questions, because I find it interesting that you have in your books, there's always a spiritual, mystical element in there, and I wondered why and why that matters. I like that, because you've got sort of
atheist detectives or a more materialist sort of approach. And then you've got this with Cathbad, or, Nelson's a lapsed Catholic, or you've got Astarte, for example.
Yes.
You've always got something in there that's a bit
I am
spiritual.
really, really interested in spirituality and what people believe and why, and I think that's why it's come into my books. It's funny though, because my first 4 books, as I said, were as Domenica de Rosa, mainly set in Italy, and I said to myself, right after that, no more Italians and no more Catholics. And I did stick to no more Italians rules until book
Nelson.
until book 10, which is the Dark Angel, when they go to Italy.
Yes.
But Catholic rule was broken the minute Nelson appeared, because I knew he would be a lapsed Catholic, and I just wanted to have all that, why people believe and why and how it affects their life. I mean, I'm not an atheist. I was brought up a Catholic. Now I would Now I would say I was a liberal Catholic, I guess. Freelance Catholic.
So am I.
Really?
So
Right.
yeah,
No wonder there's the understanding there.
Yeah.
But it's with you all the time, isn't it? And definitely I still get a great deal of comfort from prayer, meditation, and those aspects. So I also have a friend who was brought up a Catholic like me and is now pagan. So I wanted to show those. So the table is now. We're getting some supernatural coming through on the table here. So I wanted to show those views that she has, respectfully, because
that's right. Because I feel there's a real tolerance in the Ruth books that people respect. I mean, even Nelson, for heaven's sake, who you could think, oh, he's going to be a stereotypical bloke, think Cathbad's a complete idiot, but he doesn't actually think that, and they get on really well.
And they have a connection
between them, and
I think
that's quite moving, actually.
Oh no, thank you. Something Nancy Mitford said always stuck with me. She said people she really suspected were the people who talked about God as if his real name was Godfrey and God was just their nickname for him. And it's that, I suppose, the only people who might come out slightly badly in my books, I'm a little wary now as I've got older of certainty. I'm a bit wary of people who think they know the answers. And I think initially Ruth's parents who are born-again Christians, that's their line. Although
the more evangelical line.
Yes. Yeah. Although book 14, The Locked Room, the one that's just about to come out, I think Ruth is nearing more understanding of her parents' beliefs, really.
Okay.
But yes, I think it's that certainty, and I'm very wary of certainty. So I love all that doubt.
Yes.
And I love the fact that Nelson isn't quite sure what he believes, but he'll probably still say the Hail Mary if he has to. And Cathbad is a druid, but he's also not above praying to his patron saint if he wants
sort of
to.
Accommodates
he
a lot of
is, yes. And my friend who is involved in sort of pagan religion is like that too. She her dad recently died, and I said, could I ask for mass to be said for him? And she said, absolutely delighted, because lovely to have people praying for him. And and that's what I felt, really, that I wanted to pray for him and just wanted to check it was okay with her, and she was really totally okay with that. So I want, I suppose, tolerance is what I'm aiming for in the books, and just all that many paths to God.
Exactly.
Line, yes.
I mean, you get that in the postscript murders as well, don't you? That Natalka crosses herself surreptitiously at one point, and Edwin and Benedict are going to mass.
Yes.
And it's a bit like Nelson. In extremis, he might, say the Hail Mary or something.
Yes, I think so. You sort of feel, it can't hurt, can it?
Exactly.
It might help.
It might help a bit.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Right. Okay. So why crime then?
Yes, why crime? Well, funnily enough, I think I was always interested in crime because my first book that I wrote was when I was 11, and it was called The Hair of the Dog, which must have been something my parents talked about.
But you didn't know what it meant.
I didn't know, but I did understand the sort of revenge aspect of it. The hair of the dog that killed you, that bit you, is the thing that makes you better. And that was the plot. So it was set in Rottingdean, which is right near where I still live.
Yes.
And it was about a village where nothing much happens, and they stage a fake murder there. To try and get the local, to try and get on the news, really, try and get the media there. But of course the fake murder turns into a real murder. So which is not a bad plot, I don't think. But I was obviously already interested in crime, and that there's 2 detectives. One is called Edgar Stevens, because I used the name later on for Edgar, and there's a Max in it as well, so Max Gray, who I actually even used that very name in some of the books. So all the elements were there.
When you were really young?
When I was really young, and I was a big fan. I used to read Enid Blyton and the Five Fine Doubters, and then I went through Agatha Christie, absolutely loved it. I'm a real fan as well of Nancy Spain. Have you read Nancy Spain? Oh my goodness, Rosalind, I think you'd really like her, because she wrote a book that's been a big influence on me called R in the Month, and it's about murders set in a faded seaside town. And it's about poisoned oysters, hence the R in the month. And we were talking about the atmosphere of the Brighton mysteries, and I have tried to get that slightly dark, slightly melancholic atmosphere that she gets in that book. And she wrote some other really good. Cinderella Goes to the Morgue is another really good one. That's a great title, isn't it? Poison for Teacher, Death Goes on Skis. But she was, for some reason, my mum had some of these books. I think she was very popular kind of in the 50s, and my mum must have been a fan of hers, and she was out gay woman at a time when that wasn't very common in media at all, and she was often on sort of talk shows and things, so she was a really, really great person. So I think I was influenced by her as well, and that was all went into. So although my first 4 books weren't crime, I think I've always really liked crime, and then I did just suddenly have the idea. What it really was my husband Andy, who was a lawyer when I met him, retrained to be an archaeologist. He'd always wanted to be an archaeologist. And that kind of gave me the idea for the crossing places. And it was a chance remark that he made about, we were actually walking across Titchwell Marsh in North Norfolk at the time. And he said that prehistoric people thought that marshland was sacred because it's neither land nor sea, but something in between.
That's sort of liminal.
The liminal zone, a bridge to the afterlife.
Yeah.
And that's why you find bodies buried there, so-called bog bodies. Immediately, really, almost immediately, the plot for The Crossing Places, the first Ruth book, came into my head.
How interesting. That leads into something else I wanted to ask you in a minute.
And although I suppose at the time, when I thought of Ruth as a character, I wasn't even sure that it was crime, because there are sort of slight mystery elements in summer school, aren't there? And
absolutely.
I wasn't sure if it was exactly Ruth is asked by a police officer, DCI Nelson, to look at some bones he's found, and those bones are 2,000 years old, which is drawn into the case. So there's that, and the sense of is it right to dig down into the past and disturb it?
Yeah,
that's a sort of theme.
Like that,
yes, and that's definitely a theme to the books, definitely.
Yes.
So
I must just say, you said another one's due out. When is it due out?
February. Early February.
Okay.
I'll make sure you get
I'll tell my son because he loves buying them for me.
Oh, yes, The Locked Room it's called.
Okay.
And it is set during lockdown, which is
that'll be interesting.
Yeah. I thought long and hard about whether to do lockdown, really, in the books. But then, because I've written a book every year for the last 14 years, it sort of felt wrong to miss it out as well, And what I think if I were writing a standalone, I wouldn't set it in lockdown, but I sort of felt people might want to know what happened to those characters during that year.
That's a really worthwhile thing to do.
So I hope so. But and also there are many opportunities in lockdown for crime and a crime writer, really. So
do you have to plot it all meticulously before you even start to write? And do you always know what's going to happen and who's the baddie and all of that?
That's changed a bit for me, actually. So when I started, Crossing Places did sort of come into my head. And that was almost a complete plot. But other than that, I used to write like a little chapter plan for my books, like one line for each chapter, sort of thing, and sort of do it quite, it was quite short, It wasn't. Some writers do sort of immensely long plans, but just like one line for each chapter. But I would go to the end, and I would know who did it.
Right.
But the last 4 or 5 books, so probably starting with The Stranger Diaries, my first sort of standalone, I didn't have a written plan. And it was just in my head. And when I wrote each chapter, I'd kind of just write a little bit of the next chapter.
Okay.
And I read a brilliant quote by E.L. Doctorow, and he said that planning like that is like driving in the dark with your headlights on. You can only see a bit of the road, but you can make the whole journey like that. And yes, it's a really good quote, isn't it? I don't know where I'm pretty sure it's E.L. Doctorow, but and that has how it's been for me. So, and actually, Stranger Diaries, I think, has my most complicated plot because it's from 3 different points of view, and there's a book that's involved in it, and also Postscript Murders is literary as well as a literary puzzle as well. So I have done that without ever writing it down. So
that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. And do you Do you have a sort of strict routine when you're writing? Do you have a daily writing routine and sort of be disciplined about it?
I'm quite disciplined, yeah. I don't really like to write away from home, so I'm not one of those writers who takes their laptop to, if I don't have a laptop, I have a desktop, laptop to a cafe or write on trains or things. But what I really like is to be in my little writing shed. I've got a writing shed now. I had only just finished it really before lockdown, and it was an absolute godsend in lockdown, I have to say. Just having somewhere else to go, and it's in the garden.
Change of scene.
I've got a cat called Gus, and he tends to, about 8 o'clock every morning, he goes and sits by the door of the writing shed. I had to open it for him this morning, and sits and waits.
Waits for you to come start work.
He's like my little conscience, really, little furry conscience. Yeah, so ideally I'd go into the writing shed. I've got a coffee machine. I like coffee, make myself a strong coffee, and then write. And I try to write at least 1,000 words a day. That's what it's not such a big target really, but you think then, you know, ideally, so my books are about 90,000 words long, between 80 and 90. You'd think that in 80 days you'd have a book. I mean, obviously it doesn't work like that, but I do try not to go back on it too much. I do try to do a different 1,000 words each day until I have a manuscript, and then I can go back and change it. So that's how I work really, and I try and do that in the morning. Morning's better for me, and in the afternoon do admin and all the other things that you have to do. But ideally 1,000 words a day in my shed.
And how do you decide about things like, some of them you write in the present tense, don't you?
Yes.
Sort of Ruth says and Nelson says, and then I think it's the postscript murders are in the...
I can't remember. I think postscript
Writing mysteries. I don't
Writing
think
mysteries are past, simple past.
They're in the simple past, but the Ruth books aren't. And how do you decide as a writer about first or third person, present or past tense? Or does it just come?
It is really just what seems natural. And we were talking about the different atmosphere, and I do wonder a bit of the different atmosphere of the Writing Mysteries is because they're in the past tense.
That's what I wonder, is that why?
And it is that whole slightly sort of melancholic feeling you can get. If she'd known what was going to happen, she would never have gone into the room, that sort of thing. Yes. Well, you know, I didn't really plan for Ruth to be in the present tense, but because I'd written those 4 books before, that sort of women's fiction genre is often in the present tense, isn't it?
Yes.
It's often she looks, she sees, she waits, you know, and it is that. So I wrote The Crossy Places in that same way, really, and I think maybe, so some people don't like it at all, and I still get people say, I still get people saying, I couldn't read this book because it was in the present tense. Some people just don't like it. It seems a bit of a shame not to read a book because of it, but there are people who don't.
Because it's got real immediacy, hasn't it, when you do
I think so, and I think in some ways it suits a crime novel quite well because the reader is discovering everything at the same time, you know, as the writer. And crime fiction, I think, is a genre, which is one of the things I love about it, where it's you don't read in a passive way, you read in a very active way because you're trying to solve the crime.
Yes.
So I think that suits that so well, you know. She stops, she stares, she looks, you know, all that happens at once. It can be quite hard to write because it's like being sort of repeatedly hit over the head with the action, you know, it's a bang, 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 bang. So when you want to relax a bit or go into the past, sometimes that can get a bit clunky and you can get a bit pluperfect, you know. It can get a bit yes. He had something, you know, and you think, calm down. So it can be a bit, and I think after the first book, I did say to my editor, I might switch to the past. And she said, I think that would be fine. She said, to be honest, I don't think people would notice. I think it would be okay. But by then I thought maybe the present tense is the way I get Ruth. And so I do think that the fact that people have so connected with Ruth, which has been a wonderful thing, is partly to do with the present tense.
I bet it is. And people love her, don't they? Well, they love the books.
They do seem to. That's nice to hear.
And I'm from East Anglia. Well, I'm not. I'm living in East Anglia in Cambridge.
Yes,
so the Norfolk setting is so wonderful as well. And everybody I know loves them.
Oh, that's such a nice thing to hear.
Well, it's true. It is the immediacy and the warmth and Ruth's character. And
I think people like her because she's not perfect, and that was a deliberate. When I sort of thought of her as a character, I thought she was. What I liked was that she wasn't going to be perfect, and you know, she was going to be a woman who was very confident in her work as a forensic archaeologist, but not so confident in other things. Like you know, wouldn't know what to do with the scarf. You've got a very nice scarf on. You know, it is actually very pretty.
Thank you.
But she wouldn't know how to drape a scarf.
That's quite touching as well, that, isn't it? Because she thinks about Kate in relation to Michelle and the grown-up daughters, and how much better Michelle would be with clothes and makeup for Kate and hair.
Yes.
It's quite moving, really, that Ruth feels, she can't provide that.
Thank you. Hair's quite a thing. My daughter has lovely long hair, and I always feel a bit inadequate because I'm not very good at plaiting. Whereas my German friend is amazing at plaiting, and her daughter always had this wonderful plaits and sort of went round her head 3 times, and I would be at in assembly looking at the backs of their heads, and I would think Juliet's plaits were a little bit, uneven, and now she can do it herself, of course, and she can do French plaits and things that I've never tackled. So those I want, you want those moments are quite human, I think, where you think, well, why can't I be the sort of mum who can plait?
That's why people love them, isn't it? That element that we all feel.
Yeah, I hope so. Yes. And it's been very touching to me to hear people saying that the books have helped them through lockdowns. We were talking about lockdown, weren't we, at the beginning, and how we did turn to certain books. And, I decided to read the first book, Crossing Places Aloud, on my Facebook page at the beginning of lockdown, as a sort of hoping that people might find it comforting. And people did seem to really find it comforting. Yes. And there was that lovely exchange with readers saying, I'm looking forward to, 6 o'clock every night, I listen to you reading.
That's lovely.
And it was really nice, that I did feel a real connection to readers through that.
Thank you for listening to part 1 of this interview with Elly Griffiths. Look out for part 2 coming soon.